As leaders and business owners, we're faced with all types of decisions daily. Sometimes we might rely on experience, instinct, or intuition to make certain decisions. And at other times, we need data, good, reliable data to back our decisions. Hi, I'm Alicia Butler Pierre. And if you think your business is too small to have data or analytics for that matter, then think again. Whether you're collecting names and email addresses or credit card numbers and medical records, it's all considered data, and it must be protected, analyzed, and used correctly to meet operational targets. That's why the way and the type of data you collect is so important. Think of it as a gateway to innovation, operational excellence, and continuous improvement. So you have to get it right. Otherwise, you can lose money, not to mention your reputation. As the saying goes, garbage in, garbage out. This is season 13, episode 160. Let's start the show.
Welcome to Business Infrastructure, the podcast about curing back office blues of fast-growing businesses. If you're a business owner or operator looking for practical tips and solutions to scaling your business in a sustainable manner, you're in the right place. Now here's your hostess, Alicia Butler Pierre.
Having a tough time trying to explain ideas over a video conference? Try the Think Smart whiteboard. It's the fastest whiteboard software in the world and allows you to upload flowcharts and write on them while your colleagues are watching remotely. Call us today for a free demo. The number is 1-866-584-6804 or visit us online at getmytablet.com. Now that's smart. Think smart. This is season 13, where we're focusing on operational excellence, what it is and how to achieve it. Joining us today in Clearwater, Florida, is another special guest, Michiko Wolcott. She's the founder and CEO of Insight Analytics, where one of their service offerings is in developing business processes for data, analytics, and innovation. In case you're wondering what analytics is and how it can be leveraged for even small businesses, then you're in luck. Not only will Michiko give us the 411 on data and analytics, but she's also going to share an example of how she used both to help a client achieve operational excellence. Michiko, welcome. How are you today?
Great. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here.
And I realize I still said Michiko instead of Michiko, so I apologize for that.
No problem.
Yeah, as we were discussing before we actually started this recording, I have a younger cousin with the same name, and it's pronounced a little bit differently, but please bear with me and please correct me if I continue to make that mistake. So the way we were introduced was through one of my mentors, Essie Escobedo. She was kind enough to introduce us to each other, and I'm so glad that she did, because what stood out for me immediately as I started doing some background research on you is not only are you multilingual, but you're also fluent in what I call the two truly universal languages, music and math.
Oh, man.
Yeah, we're going to go there. We're going to go there
Yes.
first. Okay.
There's a whole background story that gets to that, but I'll kind of let you give me your impression or your commentary around that first.
Oh, okay, sure. Well, I was just going to simply say, years ago, I remember having a conversation with a financial planner, and he mentioned to me that on weekends he played in a band, and he was just kind of going on. And I said, that's so interesting, because I've noticed most financial planners that I know play some type of musical instrument, and I said, I wonder if there's some type of a connection between the two. And he said, well, music is mathematical.
Mm-hmm.
And that always stuck with me. So I'm wondering, Michiko, how did your passion for math and music lead you from working at companies like Equifax and North Highland to eventually starting your own business?
So this is, I think, where I have to even start from my childhood. So you're going to have to bear
Please
with me a
do.
little bit.
No, please do, because the backstories are always so important.
I grew up in Japan. I was born and I grew up in Japan. And So this is where starts to get a little bit interesting. When I was in junior high, we moved to Dothan, Alabama. This is one of those corporate transfers. Okay, I spoke no English. That's where I learned English, right? So I have lots of funny stories just on that. But I'd taken piano lessons from a very young age, and that sort of became the universal language when I was learning English. Of course, whether that's actually English or not, it's to be questioned. But anyways, so then I went on to learn like English, and then I ended up getting multiple degrees in music later. And along the line, when I actually got to all but dissertation in a doctoral program piano performance, I had this like giant epiphany. I decided that, that's really not what I wanted to do. And I sort of enrolled in master's program in statistics. And I'd been taking math on and off here and there. So it wasn't like, a huge switch, but it was a big shift in the sense that, I was almost done with this doctoral degree, right? And I decided that, hey, this is not quite it. So after I was done, got my master's degree in statistics, and then I went and, worked for Equifax eventually, and ended up running lots of analytics projects for their Latin American clients. So, my question to a lot of people is like, how many people do you know who grew up in Japan and learned English in Dothan, Alabama, got a doctorate in music, and working in Latin American projects from US, right? It's like my resume like reads like conversational piece. It's just so funny. But it does give me a really broad perspective. And as far as the kind of connection between the music and math is concerned, it's yes, one is there's I think it goes both ways. There's a lot of things in common between music and math. Math is music and music is math, but also there's a lot that are not in common. And I tend to see like the extreme cases where one is really good in both, or one is really good in one and really not comfortable with the other. So I think it sort of depends on the perspective a little bit.
Wow. So, and for those listening, I'm sure they're blown away as I was when I first learned about, again, as you mentioned, first of all, you're fluent in, let's see, it's Japan, Japanese, obviously, English, Spanish, and Portuguese. So I'm assuming the Spanish and the Portuguese came as a result of the work you were doing in Latin America.
Yeah.
Is that how that came about?
Yeah, I just don't like not understanding. So,
Yeah.
I asked if I could, when I was working there, I asked if I could take an hour, check out, back then it was cassettes, right? So check out cassette, and a set of cassettes, and, listen to it during my lunch hour. And so I had to get permission to do that too. Like, I think that was there was a checkout process, but that's how I learned Spanish, and then eventually sort of understood. And once I had Spanish, then Portuguese became a little bit easier. It's like once you learn one language, then the next one becomes easier, and next one becomes a little bit easier. But yeah, it all started with me learning English in Dothan, Alabama.
And I'm sure there was just a little bit of culture shock, right? just a little.
It's you kind of take it in stride, right? When you're 15, you just kind of it sort of is what it is. And back then, the only conversation I could hold was "it's hot" because we moved in the middle of June. And I came from the northern, part of Japan, but yeah, so that was all I could say. It was like, it is really hot.
That's hilarious. Okay, so yes, you're 15 years old.
Mhm.
You and your family immigrate to America in a small town in Alabama of all places.
Mhm.
You're learning English. You always play the piano.
Mhm.
You then go to college. So you start working at Equifax. And as you said, it gave you exposure to working in countries throughout Latin America. You eventually, master Spanish and Portuguese as well. How did you eventually come to start your own consulting firm?
So, as a result of working a lot in Latin American projects and beyond, I eventually ended up leading analytics for the international business for Equifax. And a lot of my initiatives had to do with not reinventing the wheel between different countries, and especially in production and delivery. So, from my perspective, delivery, because this is about operations, right? My perspective is like delivery is operations. And that happens even in consulting and data engagements. Now, I never formally studied operations or process methodologies, but my dad was an engineer in Japanese manufacturing, of course, and he used to,
Lean.
yep. So, when he worked in quality, he used to say, like, my job is, going around to my customers and apologizing for bad products. So, that was
Oh,
perfect
wow.
Japanese stereotype.
Mm-hmm.
But, process and quality and productivity is almost like in my genes. Now, with all this, different interests and having, run a practice in an organization and in analytics and data, my interest and passion and kind of focus in my consulting practice became how do you become effective in data and analytics, and how do you operationalize data and analytics? And there's so much focus on doing data and doing analytics that nobody's really kind of thinking about how do you, what are the elements that make it successful, right?
Mm-hmm.
And from my perspective, it kind of goes both ways. So, like we were talking about, data analysts and technology versus operations or any other business, for that matter. I see them as mutual stakeholders. So, like, there's data analytics and technologies to improve business operations. And there's other aspects, there's operational aspects to data analytics and technology. So, yes, there is such thing as IT operations. There is such thing as data operation, et cetera. And so I'm sort of really into mixing, kind of cross-pollinating different things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a big opportunity, particularly because there's so much emphasis on doing, yet somehow 60 to 70% of data analytics, whatever initiative in the market fail, right? They don't achieve expectations. And you
Mm.
kind of think about, well, why is that? And it's been like that for like over a decade. It's been like that for a long time. So there's something that we apparently continue to do not well. And that was the motivation for me to kind of get into this whole idea of not so much doing data and analytics, but how do you make it work?
As I'm listening to you, I'm wondering if part of a root cause to what you've just described is in the terms data and analytics in and of itself. Do you find that most of the people that you work with, your clients, they don't have a fundamental understanding of what that is? Because I'll be honest with you, as I was reading over a lot of your content online, I was thinking, well, I thought data and analytics were kind of the same thing. Is there a difference between the two? And if so, what is that difference?
Well, if we were to talk about just the information in general, right, there it's kind of like the raw material, which I would think of data from my again, I'm talking about kind of my perspective, right? But then there's
Mhm.
raw material, and analytics is a little bit like, okay, how do you then make the raw material into something that you can actually consume? So, like, I like the cookie analogy all the time, where you have you got the flour and you got the recipe, and then you got the appliances, which are kind of like technology in a sense, right? So
Mhm.
and the outcomes insights or cookies, and people consume it. So then there are kind of the infrastructure that kind of need to happen for all that to take place. Part of the challenge, though, is that well, beyond the terminology and beyond the understanding of how it all operates, data analytics and technology, there's so much we get so trapped in the idea of data. We get so trapped in the idea of digitization, technology tool, those kind of things. But data at the end of the day, and I mean data in sense of information, something that actually used to do something.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
data really is not about data, right? That's kind of a weird thing to say, but it's not about data. It's rather about how you approach a problem. So, a lot of the questions that I get, like from small and medium businesses, particularly, it's like, well, how relevant is analytics or AI, et
Mhm.
cetera, right? But
Mhm.
I'm too small to do this. How useful is it
Yes.
for me? It's like, forget all that, right? It really applies at any level or even individuals, because it's really about how you approach a problem. And it just so happens that data and analytics and technology are tools. A lot of times we start with data, we start with analytics, we start with technology and do the whole hammer nail thing, right?
Mhm.
If, just stop talking about data. It's actually interesting. A lot when I do strategic visioning with some of my clients on data and analytics, I do this kind of facilitated exercise, right? And I tell them, it's like, well, tell me what your articulate your vision is, what you're trying to accomplish, what your goal is. But you cannot use the word data, analytics, information, technology, machine learning, none of that. And people have a really hard time articulating what is it trying to do because there's so much focus on data and analytics. It's kind of like, okay, it's a shiny thing. Everybody else is doing it. I need to do it
Yes.
too, right? And so it's sometimes really hard to get people to step back and focus on, what problem is it that you want to make go away, or what do you need to know in order to make that problem go away. And so I, of all people who, grew up as, data and analytics practitioner, tell people to step away. Don't think about data. Don't think about analytics. Don't think about technology, but just work on articulating what it is that you want accomplished.
Yes. And I'm so glad you mentioned that because it's such a great segue to what I wanted to ask you next. And, this next question centers around, the fact that there's this conundrum in your industry, right? Because while data professionals like data scientists and artificial intelligence engineers and data analysts, they're in high demand. But to your point, and this is something that I read on your website, the quote unquote, the ideals of data and analytics maturity are too abstract and challenging to implement. So it sounds like you're really kind of, I don't want to use the term dumbing it down, but you're really forcing them to think. And this is something that a previous guest, a couple of episodes back, Carol Sanford, talked about is literally think, what is it that you're trying to use data to solve? Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I love that you're forcing your clients to get to the basics because sometimes it is easy to just kind of use these buzzwords as a mask or a shield
Yes.
to make it seem like one that you're really smart and you know what you're talking about because you can use these big words in a sentence.
Right.
Or secondly, it could just be that it's a mask for disguising the fact that you really can't articulate what's going on and what it is that that you want to improve. So, I'm also wondering, and this might be a slight diversion from, what we've been talking about so far, but I'm also wondering is the fact that people at the end of the day can't quite articulate what it is that they're trying to do, yet alone the problem that they may be trying to solve, is that part of the reason why we're seeing this increase or why so many companies are being caught off guard with these cybersecurity attacks? I don't know if that has anything to do with the type of work that you do, but it's just something that I'm curious about and I'd love to hear your take on it.
So I am not a cybersecurity or
Yeah.
any kind of IT security expert, but I think if we were to kind of take a step back and look at a broader picture, right? We're so and I said this before, but we're so caught up in sort of like the details and these check boxes and doing this, that, and the other things, and we're not stopping to think about, okay, what it is that we need to do, what are our obligations, what are we trying to accomplish, right? And I think it's really important that we don't get fixated on tools and which include technology and data and analytics, among other things. I think we need to almost look inwardly and figure out, okay, what it is that we want. But at the same time, looking inward as an individual is one thing, but you also need, as an organization or as a business, you need some sort of system to operate in, right? And it's a hard sell a lot of times because there's so much focus on doing analytics and on the technology side of things and the tools and so forth. But in a sense, we kind of need to detect the tech a little bit, right? Not to get back to the cliche, but there's people first and then process and then maybe technology. Technology and data and analytics practitioners always start from technology. That's what we know.
Yes.
Right? And there's a Dilbert comic strip that I absolutely love. Of course, he's a software engineer, and it says, he's doing root cause analysis, and he says, "I found the root of the problem. It's people. They are buggy." It's a perfect, it's a perfect explanation. I mean, that's what it is. And then, so one of the things that I do, is kind of look at stakeholders. Who are your stakeholders? Make sure you know who they are. Make sure you know your people, right? And there's a lot more of them than you think, and involve everybody. They all need to be kind of part of things, but and not to diversion from the diversion itself, but I'm a big kind of fan of lean as a philosophy and a paradigm. It sort of sets your mind, and it puts your mind in a particular framework where, yeah, then you can implement other techniques and other methods to sort of solve for that problem. But it starts with the frame of mind, right? And
Yeah.
so I really like lean as a philosophy, and I'll mention it. I'll come back to that in a little bit, but I think it's important. And so it's based on all that I kind of have this idea of, well, you have to have a kind of an organizational system, right? To
Yes.
make data and analytics happen. And it's like anything else, but I tend to call them, organizational infrastructures, but those are the enablers of people. I mean, we talk a lot about integration in the technology sense, but we need integration among humans, right?
Yes.
I'm not talking about, I don't mean that in sense of assimilation. That's not what I mean.
No.
But
I get it.
yeah, but the organizational system can enable that human integration. And of course, Deming has, there's a Deming quote that says, a bad system will beat a good person every time. And even if you want to do data and analytics, even if you want to, as individuals, do all these great things, if you don't have a system to support that in place, then yes, you'll get defeated, or you're just going to fight. It's going to be a constant battle.
So speaking of this organizational infrastructure that you referenced, and the need for having these systems that do integrate the people and the processes and the technology, what, in your opinion, does operational excellence mean?
So, people want to do well in general. I don't think people come to work, and this has been said by other people as well, but people don't come to work wanting to do a bad job. So there is a need for an organizational system. And again, the infrastructure that nurtures excellence. Again, bad system will beat a good person every time. Is the organization's designed to do well? Right. And more importantly, if you systematize and if you actually, have a good infrastructure, then you can measure better. So I look at organizational excellence as a program, as a system that enables the people to do well. There's a desire, on one hand by the people. We need to enable them to act on and actually realize those desires. I had a client that ended up establishing the Office of Operational Excellence. It used to be like, I think they called it quality, but they never quite defined what quality was. So, it was very hard to accomplish any goals or anything like that because they couldn't define goals. They didn't know what quality was. But then that sort of became a turning point for things to get better and sort of transform. I say transform in quotes, with air quotes, because that's what happened sort of in retrospect. They didn't kind of set out to transform. But yeah, that was, I think, one of the key sort of realization that they did, that, okay, we can, operationally be excellent and do that in a systematic, programmatic.
Now, for those of you who might be listening to this show for the first time, business infrastructure is an operations system for linking people, processes, and tools and technologies to ensure that growth happens in a profitable and sustainable way. Now, every project manager, anyone who has ever had to manage a project, there are two constraints or requirements that you must meet: budget and time. And it sounds like, Michiko, you worked with a client that consistently had difficulty completing projects on time. Can you describe what was going on with that particular client without divulging maybe any proprietary information?
Sure. So this particular client they were in the information services space. So data analysts and technology was their business. That's what they did, right? So the operations, everything that was their business. So I was brought in to help them to do kind of a strategic alignment and help them improve how they delivered. Again, kind of going back to my earlier point of, from our perspective, delivery is operations.
Mm-hmm.
And so they've always had this startup mentality. They started small and they kind of grew up into what they are today. But they were, operationally, they were still doing a lot by kind of this making it happen, brute force type attitude, I guess. And they made a lot happen just by brute force. Very formidable, quite honestly. But the organizational infrastructure or business infrastructure, right, did not keep up with that growth. And so when I started with them first, one of the first thing I did is I got all the senior executives, and I told them to go read the first couple of chapters of Lean Thinking by Womack and Jones. And so he gave them a couple weeks. They came back, and so we met, and they're like, okay, this is talking about us. Right. So it's like, it spoke to me. I mean, I felt like they were talking to me. And so, it's the realization of, this is a perfect example of, people can, you can have a lot of good people, but if you don't have the support structure behind it, then you're just not going to do too well. The second thing that we did after that was really, they needed to talk to each other. So, it's one of those funny things. People do not talk to each other. I'm like, why not? You're right next to them. Why don't you talk to each other? But they don't, right? And in this particular case, it was even funnier, almost in retrospect, because they were so focused on doing their own job well that they were all kind of suffering in silence, right? And so they didn't know how to talk to each other. I had to facilitate the whole process. I was like, okay, now, I can go talk to these people. I was like, yes, you work with them. And it's like, they didn't know who they worked with because they were all in silence, right? So once then they got into the comfortable with the idea of, hey, I can talk to people, then we sat down and actually mapped out a process, almost post-mortem, right? So it looked at a case study, and then when we did that, then there was like a whole bunch of task boxes that didn't connect to any. I mean, there's like literally totally orphaned task boxes. I was like, what is this doing? And then there were arrows going everywhere in circles, and so. But then once they got an understanding and they got their own context, they were like, okay, hey, we could do things differently, right? And then so after all this, basically what happens was what used to be project overruns of 24 months or more beyond the original stated goal, and hardly, not completing a whole bunch of their projects, to they're currently meeting 80% of their goals. So you might think of, well, that's 20% that's still not met. But remember, again, 70% of data and analytics and technology initiative fail. So 20% is pretty good, right?
Right.
So this is one of those kind of growth, story that they've gone through. And so this, in retrospect, ended up being a transformation. But this was one of those things where, data and analytics was kind of in the center, but there was an operational wrapper around it. And it sort of ended up becoming a really, feel-good, really good success story where they operate in a way today that just don't look like anything that they were, a few years ago.
So I have there's a lot that I have questions about. One of them being, you mentioned mapping out a post-mortem process. Now, I've heard of the pre-mortem exercise, and we'll make sure we have a link to, there's a Harvard Business Review article that does a really good job of explaining a pre-mortem exercise. But what is a post-mortem, and what exactly was the process? Was the process their actual project delivery process, their service delivery process? What process were you all actually looking at or mapping out?
So they had internal projects as well as external projects. So, external projects basically being serviced directly to clients or customers. So we picked multiple processes. One was internal, and one, at least several, was external.
Okay.
But basically, it's nothing more than, okay, we did this project. Let's see what happened. Right? It's a case study. So I call them post-mortem, but it's because it's afterwards, and it's afterwards of something that didn't quite run well. But that said, let's look at a case study. What worked? What didn't work? Well, there was a lot more that didn't work than that did work. But that was kind of realized until that point, nobody had looked at how anything was connected to anything. And so again, it's, we don't live in isolation. We're people, and we're connected, and everything you do has an input and an output. And which means that everything you do, you are a customer to somebody, and then you have a customer in somebody else because somebody's receiving that output. And it's
Right.
the realization of this whole thing that said, hey, we are all kind of doing in a way that is not helping anybody else. That was an interesting and really kind of satisfying transformation to watch go through, because how people kind of behaved in an organization changed because of their desire to do well.
So when they initially reached out to you, was it because they said, were they using those traditional big words? We have this data issue, or we want to take a look at our analytics, or did they just state very matter of factly, we're having difficulty delivering our projects both internally and externally on time?
Well, it was kind of secondary. They kind of reached out to me because I knew their industry, and they're like, we need some
Mhm.
help. So it was a really bit more of like, well, let us, can you help us kind of align, strategically, and,
Okay.
do visions and things like that. But there was a lot. So that kind of sounds good at the very, high level, right? But then there's a lot that was going on underneath that wasn't going to make that happen.
Mm. Okay.
So then you have to kind of look at, okay, in order to do that, you have to do this. And then in order to even define where you want to be, then you kind of had to take a step back and say, okay, what does it mean? And how does that relate to what we're doing today? And
Mhm.
so it wasn't explicit that way, but it had to happen. It's one of those things that had to happen that way.
Now, if we think about that people component that we've been talking about, whether we reference it as organizational infrastructure or business infrastructure, I
Mhm.
know earlier you mentioned the importance of identifying who the stakeholders are. Can you talk to us a little bit more about, who were you getting together in the room? Was it purely executives? Was it a cross section of people that work through at different levels within the company?
So it's sort of started with the executive people because they are the ones who said, "Hey, I need help."
Hmm.
So from a project kickoff perspective, I knew that they were the first people that I talked to. But it's everybody, right? Grassroots, bottom up. At the end of the day, there are people who make the day to day happen, and they need to work with each other, and they need to understand who they're working with, and who they're a customer to, and who their customers are. And I mean customers in a sense that somebody who receives information or receives the result of what you're doing, not necessarily internal or external customers in a more traditional sense. But we are all connected. We're all networked. We talk about network in a more social sense, I think. But beyond the technology, we're connected to people, and we like to, a lot of times we kind of assume that we are, in the back, and we are isolated and we don't see people, but that's not true. There's always somebody on the other end or at the end of your process, right? And
Hmm.
so it's important to realize that you're connected to at least to the end person, and there are probably several other people that are connected in between, and how you're adding value to that end person, and how each little component in between is adding value to the end product, to the end customer. And that's another reason why I like kind of like lean as a philosophy, because you're adding value, and maybe you're not adding value, and just kind of thinking through, okay, how am I adding value to the end product or end person, or a really client or a customer, and who all are adding what value to that value chain or value network.
Hmm. What are some of the tools that you're using? So I know you referenced there's obviously the lean framework,
Hmm.
which I wish I could just have a conversation with you just on all of the Japanese words that we use, like Gemba and
Yes.
Kaizen and all of these Kanban, all of those words. I love it. So, and the fact that you can speak, firsthand from these principles and philosophies, considering the fact that your father had a very strong background in manufacturing and sounds like he definitely used that lean approach that comes out of Toyota, right? So I'm wondering, what other tools were you using? You mentioned process maps. So are you mapping things out in Microsoft Visio, or do you have another mapping tool that you prefer or recommend?
I'm old school when it comes to most anything. So no, I use Visio, or I think some people, I've used what is it, a Lucid Chart with some other people, but it depends
Mm-hmm.
on what it is that they have or they're comfortable with. And at the end of the day, it's like that's just tool. I mean, we were just sitting there literally on whiteboarding with a whiteboard with a
Mm-hmm.
marker. Okay, this happens here. This no, it doesn't. It's erasing here, and then let's move this over here. And but then it was really all just kind of really old school.
Yeah.
Tools to me are secondary, and yes, there are some easier tools out there, I think, but it's more important to make it happen. It's more important to actually do it and
Mm-hmm.
not worry too much about what tool I'm going to use. At least that's sort of the way I look at it.
And I'm also curious, with the way that you work with your clients, do you break up the work, or do you encourage your clients, in this case in particular, since they had difficulty delivering projects on time, did you find that they used the more traditional project management approach of the waterfall approach versus doing things in short sprints, using that Scrum or Agile approach?
You have to start somewhere, right? So
Hmm.
when you don't have any process at all, you have the waterfall is a pretty easy place to start. I mean, just to understand, sort of establish a baseline, right?
Hmm.
That's not where they ended up. They are a lot more in a kind of a agile Scrum type scenario, and they're going in sprints of X number of weeks and so forth. So that's where they ended up, and I think that's a natural progression. But if you're not used to thinking about processes at all, sometimes agile can be a little bit overwhelming. And
Mm.
so, take a step back and say, okay, here's traditionally processes sort of tended to work, and at least get that process thinking mindset, and get understand how everything is connected, and then sort of like break it down into smaller pieces, because
Hmm.
then you can look at the totality of agile multiple sprints, right, as a giant project. They're just broken up into sprints, and it's worked well for, at least for the clients that I've worked with, particularly when they don't have when they're not really super process mind oriented, if let's
Hmm.
say. So it's a good starting point. It's like you start with the classics, and then you kind of evolve into a little bit more modern, and it gives you a better appreciation, I think, of why you're doing the way you're doing when you use more modern approaches.
Yeah. Yeah. So speaking again of I guess tools and technologies that you may use, for those who are listening right now, are there additional resources that you would recommend, Michiko, for people who might be listening thinking, wow, I definitely want to learn more about all of this, and data and analytics and lean. I know you mentioned the book Lean Thinking, but
Mhm.
are there any other resources that you can recommend?
So going back to, I'm really old school. So the some of the new books are great, but going back to kind of like, what are the fundamentals, right? And so Out of the Crisis by Deming, and that's where he the that is where the origin of the 14 principles of management was first in a book. And out of any number of things, right, those points just continue to be true. And I just like the whole idea of systems thinking and kind of managing in systems and letting the people be who they are. And
Mm.
so I think that's a really good foundation, let's say, for setting all of the framework and the mindset. And not to get a little bit, even too common sense or maybe even cliche, but I am actually a big fan of Seven Habits of Highly Effective People by
Mm.
Stephen Covey.
Yeah.
And yes, it's common sense, and it's a little bit more written from an individual personal level, but it does extend to organizations. And for whatever it's worth, lean thinking, Out of the Crisis, and Seven Habits, for anybody that I'm working, any practitioner, data and analytics and technology practitioner that I'm working with, I consider that to be required reading.
Mm. Excellent. Now, I noticed that you also have some publications. I was looking at your LinkedIn profile. Are there any of these that you think would be a really good read for people who just want to know more about analytics in general, and just so they can maybe even educate themselves on how to find people like you to help them leverage data and analytics in solving particular challenges that they may be experiencing within their operations?
I tend to write a lot of small things. In fact, I think one of my kind of goals for the year is to have a whole bunch of pithy one-liners on Twitter about, data and analytics. So it's kind of like fortune cookies, right? Of data and
Okay.
analytics. But beyond that, a lot of my writings tend to be in kind of like white papers and blogs and things like that. And of course, I have some materials and videos and even coaching and workshop around like, what are the fundamentals of, becoming insight oriented as an organization or as a business, as a practice? What are the requirements? Where does, again, organizational or business infrastructure for data and analytics? And then some non-technical topics, right? One of the things that I think is important that we don't do enough of is that the practitioners, we need to educate the practitioners to be more human in a sense,
Mm-hmm.
and how to work with other humans, because a lot of times we're so enamored with this whole technology thing that we forget that there's a human, we are humans. And so in some ways, yes, I'm getting a little away from doing and actually, being on the technical side of data and analytics, but it's sort of still maintained that it's the human people make it happen, right? It's the people make
Mm-hmm.
it reality. And so let's understand how people work and how to, adjust or how to fit the framework with the people in order to make data and analytics happen. So those are kind of the topics that I try to address in a lot of my materials.
I must say, it's very refreshing to hear a techie speak so much on the importance of focusing on the people. And to your point, educating the practitioners of data and, whether it's data science, data analytics, AI, machine learning, all of those things, educating them on just how to be more human. Because a lot of times we can, I think, get caught up even within these frameworks, which is something else that I love about your approach is that these different frameworks, but it's really about figuring out what are the best, where can I draw the best pieces from all of these different frameworks and all of these, insights and principles from even from the different books that you mentioned to craft a solution that's going to work best for a particular client. Not being
Absolutely.
so rigid, right? Not being so rigid,
Absolutely.
yeah, in the delivery of that.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the 80, well, actually, I'm a complete abuser of the 80/20 rule. And and I'm sure, Pareto's probably rolling over in his grave. But, it's there's a fine line between I am very different from everybody else and I have a lot in common with everybody else. I think a lot of times what happens is that, we kind of start from the point of how we're different. We start from the point of disconnect, right? And forget
Mm,
that we have a lot in common. And so even a lot of these other, these books, be it lean or, whatever else, at the bottom, at the very, bottom of it, there's a lot in common. And there are different implementations, right? The implementations are different. And
mhm,
so it's that implementation that you have to adjust a little bit to make it fit for you. But at the end of the day, it kind of has to all come back to, okay, what is the what's at the bottom? What's, the fundamentals, the basics. Never goes
mhm.
out of style.
Mhm. Well, this has been absolutely phenomenal. And again, very refreshing because you're showing us that there is a human side to being a technologist, which again is it's not something that we hear every day. And so I really appreciate you sharing your perspective on that. So, what's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
I'm relatively easy to find. There's not a whole lot of people named Michiko Wolcott. So, so I'm relatively easy to find. But website, I have a website, msiteanalytics.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Michiko Wolcott. You can follow me for my fortune cookies of data. at Twitter. And of course, you can always email me at info@msiteanalytics.com.
And what's your Twitter handle?
Oh, it's Michiko_Wolcott.
Okay. Well, we'll definitely make sure we have links to all of these things in our the resources section of our show notes. So what I'd like to do quickly here, Michiko, is kind of recap some key things that you share with us. It's all been absolutely phenomenal, but if I may just attempt to kind of point out some of the highlights. First of all, I'm envious because because of your dad's background and the fact that you said that, process and quality and lean is really just in your genes. And the fact that you were born in Japan and being part of the Japanese culture where, I've always said this about Americans, we have a culture of materialism. Whereas in other parts of the world, it's more about making the most of the resources that you have, which is why I think lean tends to fare better, I guess, outside of America, because American companies are still very much gluttonous, but that's another conversation, right, for another day. But I love the fact that you explain to us in very clear, easy to understand terms the difference between data and analytics. Data being that raw material that you were talking about. It's just literally what is the data that you have, whether it's all of the you export a contact list from a particular database, and that's raw data. But what you actually do with that data, how you actually use it to develop a new product, come up with a new service, improve a product or improve a service, whatever it is, that's the analytics piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome. And you also mentioned how data really isn't about the data in and of itself. It's about how you approach a problem. And, talking about the fact that there's so much emphasis on the doing and the details that we don't actually think about what are we really trying to accomplish, which is why I appreciate your approach so much, because you're getting away from all of the jargon and getting it down to the basics, because it's then forcing people to actually think.
Yeah,
And to
God
not
forbid, right?
right, and not hide behind the big fancy words, right, and the technical
Exactly.
jargon. And then also, speaking of definitions, providing your definition of operational excellence being a system that enables people to do well. Because at the end of the day, as you said, delivery is operations, whether you are delivering a physical good or an intangible thing like a service. The delivery is all about the operations. And thank you again for sharing that success story with this large multinational client that you had. I just like to kind of recap the process that you shared with us. I think first you were saying you help your clients figure out what is the goal, and to encourage them to articulate that goal without using the words data and analytics and AI and machine learning. And again, all of those buzzwords that we constantly see out here in the world today. And then secondly, encouraging them to do some required reading. Mm-hmm. I think that's really important because it serves as a means of reinforcing the work that you are about to do with them. So, getting them to read Lean Thinking and the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, as well as Out of the Crisis. I think that's phenomenal. And then third, you mentioned you encourage them to talk to each other. Because as you mentioned, so many times people are suffering in silence. But imagine what happens if they actually do break down those, what are oftentimes invisible barriers, and actually start having conversations with each other. Because as you put it so eloquently, everything you do has an input and an output, and there's always someone on the other side of on the other end of your process, that you add value to, especially that end customer. And then lastly, you mentioned mapping out that postmortem process, which helped this particular client figure out how to better streamline their project delivery, both internally and externally. The result being them being able to currently meet 80% of their project related goals. And that is phenomenal, considering that 70% of most data initiatives fail. This has been absolutely phenomenal. I can't thank you enough. If you want to know more about data and analytics and how you can use it to achieve operational excellence at your company, regardless of how large or small your company is, make sure you connect with Michiko at msightanalytics.com. That's M like money, sight, SIGHT, analytics.com. You can also find her on LinkedIn. I'll spell her name for you. It's M, again, like M for money, ICHIKO. Last name is spelled WOLCOTT. Michiko, thank you so much for taking time to speak with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's been a great pleasure. It's been fun.
Again, there's so much. I wish we could just do a show just on, the Japanese words that we use in Lean and Six Sigma. So for those of you listening, make sure you check out businessinfrastructure.tv, because that's where we're going to have quick links to all of these resources that Michiko was kind enough to share with us. There's no need to type out that web address. Just click the link in the description of this episode wherever you're listening to this podcast, and it will take you directly to this list of recommended resources. You'll also find more information about the HubSpot Podcast Network, as well as our sponsors. Please support them. When you do, it helps us keep this show free for you. Again, click that businessinfrastructure.tv link in this episode's description. Thank you so much for tuning in and for being a loyal subscriber. Remember, stay focused, be encouraged. This entrepreneurial journey is a marathon and not a sprint. Until the next time.
Thank you for listening to Business Infrastructure, the podcast about curing back office blues with Alicia Butler-Pierre. If you like what you've heard, do us a favor and subscribe, leave a rating and review, and more importantly, share with your colleagues and team members who could benefit from the information. Join us next week for another episode of Business Infrastructure with Alicia Butler-Pierre.